I remember the way he said it, like it was nothing. Just another Monday, just another meeting, just another woman in the room not worth listening to. We've heard enough from her. Let's focus on solutions, not worst-case fantasies. That's what he said. Right there. In the middle of the quarterly all-hands meeting, dozens of faces turned to look at me. Some embarrassed for me, some amused. Some just relieved it wasn't them. I wasn't new, I wasn't loud, and I wasn't wrong. But none of that mattered when Carl, the man who'd been my boss for 6 years, cut me off mid-sentence and waved his hand like I was a mosquito buzzing near his ear. Dismissive. Public. Final. The screen behind him still showed my last slide. System vulnerability. Client exposure risk. $11 million. No one asked what it meant. No one cared that I had stayed up all weekend running the numbers twice, triple-checking every line of code after the new patch release. I knew what was coming, and I tried to stop it. That's what haunts me most. I tried. But instead of taking 5 minutes to listen, Carl smiled, leaned on the conference table like he was hosting a TED Talk, and said, Fear doesn't build great companies. Vision does. Let's move on. I remember my throat closing up. I remember the sound of someone shifting in their chair, awkward and sharp in the silence. And I remember the folder I was holding suddenly felt heavier, like it knew it would be useless in my hands. I sat down without a word. Carl didn't look at me again. He turned to Mike from sales and asked about quarterly projections. And just like that, 6 years of loyalty, gone, smothered under a layer of ego and PowerPoint charm. Someone passed me a bottle of water. I didn't even drink it. I just stared at the screen, still showing my last slide, still warning what was coming. But the part that stung the most? It wasn't being dismissed. It was realizing that no one expected me to speak again. Not in that room. Not in that role. To them, I had been absorbed into the wallpaper of the office. Reliable, quiet, harmless. But they forgot one thing. I don't speak unless I know exactly what I'm saying. And when I speak, especially in front of the board, I make damn sure they hear me. So I smiled. That quiet, that clipped kind of smile you give when someone just wrote their own obituary and handed it to you. I gathered my notes, closed my laptop softly, and whispered to myself, All right, noted. Across the room, one of the interns, a sharp-eyed girl named Tessa, caught my gaze. She didn't look away. She raised one eyebrow like she was waiting to see what I'd do next. I didn't know it then, but Tessa, she would matter more than I ever imagined. And Carl, well, he should have listened. It wasn't always like that. Carl wasn't always that man. In fact, when I first joined the company 16 years ago, he was the one who showed me where the good coffee was. He was 3 years ahead of me back then. Loud, charismatic, slightly disorganized, but likable. I was quiet, detail-oriented, and just coming off a layoff from a startup that folded too fast. We made a good team. In those early days, Carl was always floating 10 feet above the ground with big ideas, while I was the one grounding them with spreadsheets, risk models, and contingency plans. And he'd say things like, You're the only reason I don't crash the whole plane, Ava. I believed him. When we landed the Jameson contract, that massive software rollout for a regional bank, it was because I caught the flaw in their API structure hours before we pushed live. Carl got the handshake, I got the nod. But back then that was enough. I didn't care about credit. I cared about building something that wouldn't break. And the company noticed. I was promoted to head of risk management within 5 years. We weren't a tech giant, but we were nimble, fast-growing, and I helped design most of the internal systems that kept us afloat. Audit prep, vendor protocols, client-side encryption standards, you name it, I had a hand in shaping it. Carl once said I was the company's quiet spine. And maybe that's what made me invisible later. Because spines don't speak, do they? They just hold things up. Around year 10, things began to change. Carl moved up, director of operations, then VP, then finally COO. And me? I stayed where I was. Not because I lacked ambition, but because I believed in the work I was doing. I believed I was where I needed to be. But something shifted in Carl. The jokes stopped being kind. The questions during meetings became barbed. Do we really need to worry about every single risk scenario? He'd ask, eyes sweeping the room like I was a relic from a bygone era. At first, I laughed it off. But then came the quarterly reviews that went missing from my inbox. Meetings where I used to be in the room, I now read about in recaps. I once emailed Carl asking if I should prep for the cybersecurity workshop we hosted every March. He wrote back, "Don't worry about this one, we're streamlining the agenda." That workshop had been my idea. I'd built it from scratch. I still remember staring at the screen, trying to understand how something I'd nurtured became a footnote in someone else's story. But I kept going. Because that's what women like me do, right? We keep going. Even when our names are quietly erased. Even when someone else's face appears on the deck we stayed up all night creating. Even when no one sees the threads we're still holding together. There was this moment, just a few years ago, when the entire sales division was scrambling to secure a renewal with Archer Tech, our largest client. Something in their back-end system kept crashing, and no one could trace it. They were threatening to walk. While everyone else panicked, I pulled the vendor logs from 6 months back, found the root issue in a third-party update, and wrote a fix overnight. We kept the contract. Carl celebrated with champagne in the main office. He even toasted to our brilliant DevOps team. I wasn't invited to that celebration. A week later, I found the thank you email from Archer Tech's CTO forwarded to Carl. He never passed it on. That was the first time I saved the evidence. Just kept it. No drama. No confrontation. Just dragged the email into a private folder and whispered to myself, "Don't forget this." And then, it kept happening. I'd join Zoom meetings and find my screen access revoked. I'd send suggestions in project threads and watch them be ignored, until someone else, usually a man newer to the team, repeated the same thing and got praised for original thinking. My name was left off a product memo that contained security protocols authored myself. I mentioned it once, lightly, to Carl over coffee in the break room. He didn't even look up from his phone. Just said, "You're a team player, Ava. Don't start keeping score now." That sentence stuck with me, like a warning disguised as praise. Like he was telling me, in his own way, your loyalty is expected, not appreciated. I started noticing the shift in others too. Bethany, the junior analyst I had mentored for 2 years, stopped looping me in. Derek from finance, who used to bring me data ahead of deadlines, now sent everything directly to Carl's new strategy guy. Even IT, my own department, was now reporting to a newer, flashier title Carl had created, Chief Systems Architect. A role he'd given to a 28-year-old ex-startup bro who wore hoodies to client meetings. Still, I didn't complain. I did what women like me were raised to do. I worked harder. But the part that broke something inside? It was the Friday I walked into conference room B and saw the Q3 rollout deck, open, live on the screen. My words, my risk flags, my forecast. Only, the document said, prepared by Mike Hanley, Strategic Ops. And Carl? He stood at the head of the table, smiling, flipping through the slides like they were his. When the room applauded the forward-thinking leadership, I stayed at the back holding a cup of stale coffee. Not one person turned around. That night, I didn't sleep. I opened my laptop, pulled every saved file, email, timestamp, project trail, anything with my name, my fingerprints. I made backups, printed copies, stored them in a secure drive at home. I wasn't going to shout. I wasn't going to beg to be seen. But I wasn't going to be erased either. A few weeks later, I ran into Tessa in the copy room, the intern who once held my gaze during that awful meeting. She glanced around, then leaned in. "Just so you know, I saw your notes in that system before I copied them. It was yours. You know that, right?" I didn't respond. But in that moment, something hardened inside me. Not anger, not revenge, just a quiet decision. They think I'm finished. Let them. The failure hit on a Thursday morning. I was already at my desk earlier than most when I saw the alert come through the client's secure channel. Urgent, unexplained access breach. Live systems affected. Data leak suspected. The words blurred for a second. Then cleared. Then hit. It was the exact scenario I'd warned Carl about in that meeting. The one where he silenced me. The one where he smiled and said, "Let's focus on solutions, not worst-case fantasies." Except this wasn't fantasy anymore. It was $11 million worth of liability. It was live data, real names, real accounts, leaking through a backdoor that had never been patched. Because he told them I was overreacting. Because they listened. Within 10 minutes, IT was scrambling. Mike, the strategy guy who took my credit, was white as a sheet. And Carl? Carl wasn't in yet. He had a tennis match that morning. Priorities. I sat still. I didn't join the frenzy. I didn't shout, "I told you so." I just opened the file I'd quietly labeled patch memo ignored.pdf and watched the timestamp from 6 weeks ago. My name. My warning. Unread. Unforwarded. There was a moment, just one, where I almost stood up and walked into the war room, almost offered to help clean up the mess, but something in me stopped, because they didn't want my voice when it could have prevented the fire. They didn't deserve it now that everything was burning. So I stayed in my chair, typed a quiet email, attached the patch memo, subject line, in case helpful. Sent it to Carl, CC'd legal, then turned off my monitor and left for an early lunch. By the time I came back, Carl had already returned. The color in his face was gone. He didn't look at me. I watched him stand in the hallway, whispering furiously to legal and the head of IT. Tessa passed by me and whispered, "They're trying to blame it on third-party vendors." Of course they were. Later that afternoon, Carl held a meeting. Small room, closed door, everyone tight-lipped. And then, with a straight face, he said the sentence that would tilt everything. "We've traced the vulnerability. There was a missed protocol review in risk management. One of Ava's teams didn't escalate the change request." My body went cold. He was pinning it on me. For a second, I couldn't move. Not even blink. The words echoed like a punch. One of Ava's teams. Not our team. Not we missed something, but mine. Mine, as if I'd vanished from the table but left my name behind to carry the weight. I looked around the room. No one said a word. Some looked at their notes. Some just looked away, like shame was contagious. I thought about speaking up. I thought about standing and telling the truth. But the truth doesn't always land when the room is already sold on the lie. So I swallowed it, the burn of betrayal, the helpless fury rising up my throat. And when the meeting ended, I didn't go back to my desk. I walked outside, sat in my car with the door open and let the wind fill the silence I couldn't break. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe it's time to let go. Let them take what they want. Let the building fall. And then, Tessa knocked on my window. I flinched. Wiped my eyes quickly, tried to breathe steady. But she didn't look surprised or uncomfortable. She crouched down and said softly, "I saw the timestamp on your patch memo. I saw when you submitted it. The day Carl deleted the forward from his inbox." My breath hitched. She pulled something from her sleeve, a screenshot on her phone. And that's when it shifted. The numbness cracked. The doubt curled inward, and something cold and clear stepped forward in its place. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to plead. I had proof. That evening, when the office lights had dimmed and the air turned heavy with end-of-day silence, I stayed. I waited until most people had left. I opened my personal drive and copied the files, the emails, the memos, the server logs showing exactly when the patch was ignored. Tessa stood beside me, quiet as a shadow. When I finished, I placed a small folder on Carl's desk, not labeled urgent, not flagged for HR, just 3 words for board review. And then I walked out. No one stopped me. No one even noticed, but they would. They would. The boardroom was too quiet. That kind of silence that wraps around your shoulders like a wet towel, thick, heavy, and waiting to suffocate someone. It was Friday morning. The quarterly performance review. All 11 members of the executive board sat in their dark leather chairs, flanked by assistants and note-takers. Coffee carts rolled in, water bottles were placed without a sound. The projection screen glowed with the company logo. Carl stood near the front. Polished, crisp suit. Wedding band gleaming. He had that politician's smile again, the one he used when charm was the only thing left to throw. No one would have guessed a data breach happened just 2 weeks prior under his watch. No one. Except me. I sat in the second row of chairs, not at the table. That was Carl's doing, of course. I was invited as a courtesy. The team member who had managed legacy systems during the affected period. But this wasn't a meeting. It was a performance. Carl cleared his throat, clicked the remote. The first slide appeared. Q1, Q3 operational analysis. And the lie began. "We encountered a minor disruption," Carl said smoothly. "But with quick coordination across departments, especially our ops and IT teams, we managed it with minimal client impact." Minimal? I looked down at my folded hands. My fingers had gone numb from gripping the small envelope in my lap. He kept going, talking about team resilience, data realignment, and rapid cycle response. Buzzwords. Noise. Then came the moment. Carl clicked to the next slide and said, and of course, our success was due to key team players who understood how to act fast without panic. He turned, made brief eye contact with Mike, then pointed to a photo of the new systems architect team. Tessa's face was in the second row. She blinked. That was her cue. She stood. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that stings your ears. Tessa, intern, barely 22, still in her pressed blazer and two big heels, walked slowly to the front. She held up a USB. I have a file, she said calmly, voice just loud enough to carry. A folder of risk reports that were submitted 6 weeks before the breach, including a patch recommendation. It was authored by Ava. Someone in the board leaned forward. Carl froze mid-step. Tessa continued. The email was sent, the request was logged, the patch was ignored. And, she turned, locking eyes with Carl. The deletion was tracked, you could feel it. The moment a room full of power shifted, eyes moved from Carl to me, then back again, then to the USB in Tessa's hand. Carl stammered. This isn't the place. But the chairwoman raised her hand, silent. Let her finish. I stood up slowly, not rushed, not dramatic, just steady. Every chair in the room turned toward me. Carl's eyes locked on mine, wide, sharp, desperate. He shook his head, barely noticeable. I walked past him without looking. Tessa handed me the USB like it was a matchstick, and I was holding gasoline. I didn't say much, just plugged it in, opened the file. The projection screen flickered, then displayed my memo. Patch recommendation, potential data breach exposure. Date stamped, signed, readable by everyone in the room. Then I clicked again, and pulled up the internal deletion log. Carl's name? The timestamp. The same hour he'd claimed to be escalating the risk to ops. A soft gasp somewhere in the room. I turned to face the board. I submitted that report 6 weeks before the breach. I followed every protocol, and when the breach occurred, I sent it again, with no response. I paused, let the silence breathe. This wasn't a team failure. This was a silencing. Carl started to speak, his voice tight. This is being taken out of context. We all know how fast things move. There are gaps, miscommunications. But then, from the corner of the room, someone else stood. It was Raj Patel, Senior VP of Client Risk. He hadn't spoken the entire meeting. He held up a single printed email. I received a forwarded version of Ava's memo. Not from Carl, but from a junior assistant who was confused why it had been dropped from the ops review schedule. He looked at Carl. I asked you directly if there was anything urgent from Risk. You said no. Carl's mouth opened, but nothing came out. The chairwoman turned to him. Carl, did you delete this report? He looked around, hands twitching, face flushed. It didn't seem credible. It was speculative. I was trying to prevent panic. By deleting it? Now her voice wasn't calm. It was steel. Another board member leaned forward. We trusted you to surface risk, not bury it. Carl took a step back. I didn't mean to. You didn't listen, I said quietly. Everyone looked at me. And when someone doesn't listen, people get hurt. Silence fell like a closing door. Carl's face had gone pale, sweat at his collar. No one stood by him. The chairwoman stood next. Thank you, Ava. Please stay for follow-up. Carl, we'll need to speak privately. But it wasn't a request. It was a sentence. Carl didn't move. No one clapped. No one nodded. They just watched him pack up his laptop with shaking hands and walk out. The man who once stood at the head of the table left without anyone saying goodbye. And me, I stood a little taller. Still quiet, but this time, they were listening. Carl didn't come back to the office that afternoon. His glass-walled office stayed dark, blinds half-drawn, desk untouched. Someone from HR came by, cleared a few items, framed photos, a coffee mug, a golf trophy that hadn't moved in 5 years. No one asked where he went. No one had to. By Monday, the company email announced that Carl was stepping down to pursue new opportunities. No mention of gratitude, no warm farewell. Just a timestamp. And silence. The office changed after that. Little things. Meetings that used to be closed door became open again. People knocked before using someone else's work. Bethany, who hadn't looked me in the eye in months, stopped by my desk with a post-it note that just said, "Thank you, I'm sorry. I didn't need more." But justice, it turned out, wasn't finished. The board launched an internal audit, not just about the breach, but about patterns. Patterns of ignored warnings, disappeared reports, credits reassigned. And they kept finding my name in the original drafts, in the flagged tickets, in the escalation trails that stopped right at Carl. 2 major clients, Archer Tech and Ridgeway Financial, requested direct meetings. Not with Carl. With me. I didn't say much. I just answered their questions with clarity and pulled up what I'd kept: the risk matrices, the proposals, the recommendations that had gathered dust because someone wanted shine more than safety. They asked if I'd be willing to take over as interim director of risk strategy. I said I'd think about it. The offer sat in my inbox for 3 days. Not because I didn't know what I wanted, but because I finally had the space to decide. I walked through the office that Thursday afternoon, slower than usual. Watched teams working, laughter from the analytics pod, someone playing music low through wireless speakers, and I saw the way people looked at me now. Not with fear, not with pity, with something else, like they were remembering I had always been here. I stopped outside Carl's old office. The blinds were still down. The door was slightly ajar, empty now, except for the echo of everything that used to happen behind it. I pushed it open, stood there for a second, then shut the door quietly, turned and walked to a different floor, one I hadn't been to in years. HR. I knocked once, they opened, and I said, "I'll take the role, but on my terms." They nodded. No resistance, no excuses, just understood. My terms were simple: direct report to the board, autonomy over risk communication, and a mentorship fund for early career women in system strategy, starting with interns like Tessa. Later that evening, I found a note on my desk. No signature, just 5 words: "You handled it with class." I knew who it was from. Mike hadn't been seen much lately. Rumor had it he'd asked to transfer. And Bethany? She started sitting next to me again in team briefings, never said much, but she listened. Eyes forward, shoulders square, and that was enough. The next day, I packed up my things from the cubicle. Not because I was leaving, but because I finally had an office of my own. I carried 1 box, set it down, pulled out a single photo of my daughter from a dusty frame, wiped it clean, and placed it on the new desk. Then I reached for the nameplate they'd given me, still wrapped in plastic. Ava Lawrence, Director, Risk Strategy Division. I didn't smile, didn't cry, just exhaled, soft like the end of a storm that no longer needed thunder. Some mornings, I still wake up early. Not out of habit or anxiety, just peace. The kind that settles in your bones when you know you're no longer trying to prove yourself in rooms that were never meant to see you. I walk into work now without armor. No mental rehearsals, no imaginary comebacks. No need to shrink myself so others feel bigger. Instead, I carry a leather bag my daughter picked out at a thrift store. Something she said looked boss enough. And I smile every time I unzip it and pull out my old planner with pages scribbled during years I was invisible. The irony? Those notes, the messy ones written between back-to-back meetings and skipped lunches, became the foundation for the new direction of the Southeast Strategy Division. The division I now lead. No bold rebranding, no flashy announcement, just quiet competence, finally seen. One afternoon, Tessa dropped by my office. She didn't knock, just peeked in with that same gentle energy she always had. She had a new badge around her neck, IT lead. "You were right," she said, placing a tiny potted succulent on my desk. "Quiet doesn't mean weak, just means you're saving your words for the moment they matter." I didn't say much, just leaned back in my chair, nodded, and finally let myself feel the fullness of that moment. Later that week, I was walking out of the building when I heard someone behind me say, "She's the one who called it," before all of them. They didn't say it to me, didn't need to. Because sometimes, being heard doesn't mean everyone has to clap. It just means they stop pretending you were never right. I don't carry the weight of what happened anymore, not because it didn't hurt, it did. Deeply. But because I no longer feel the need to carry other people's blindness as my burden. There's power in walking away. Not as a retreat, but as a return. Back to yourself. To what you knew all along, before the gaslighting, the meetings where they talked around you, the emails where your name just disappeared. I found my rhythm again. Outside boardrooms, in small things. Like mentoring a new intern who reminds me so much of who I used to be. Eager. Soft-spoken, always over-prepared. Or in late-night journaling, cooking dinner to old jazz records, planting herbs by the kitchen window. The life they tried to shrink me out of, it's blooming, quietly, steadily, without them. Last week, I got a message from someone I never expected. One of the guys who used to laugh the loudest during those meetings. It just said, "Your calm was the loudest thing in the room. I see it now. Thank you." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Because healing doesn't always sound like a roar. Sometimes it's just a breath that doesn't catch anymore. And if you've ever been silenced, underestimated, or made to feel small at work, this story was for you. You are not what they called you. You're what you chose to become next. And you're still here. That matters. If any part of this felt like a chapter from your own life, tell me in the comments. I want to hear it. And if you know someone who's been carrying invisible bruises at work, share this with them. Let them know they're not alone. And stick around. We tell stories that speak for those who've been quiet too long.